A 12-year-old girl in a forgotten Oregon town just did what 30 engineers couldn't. She fixed a $50 million hybrid supercar with nothing but a notebook, a mechanic dad, and the belief that cooperation beats competition. But what happened next? Her quiet brilliance not only saved the car, it exposed a corporate sabotage, revived her mother's lost dream, and launched a global revolution in how machines and people work together. This emotional story of how a mechanic's daughter changed everything will inspire you long after it ends. But before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to see our global family in the comments. Let's begin. Ethan McAllister's hands were stained with grease and time, gripping a chipped mug of instant coffee as he sat across from his daughter in the tiny kitchen of their rundown cabin in Deer Hollow, Oregon. The mug still bore the faded logo of McAllister Innovations, a dream crushed years ago when cancer took his wife, Amelia, and the company they'd built together. Now, Ethan spent his days working under the creaking roof of Cooper's garage, fixing broken things while trying to hold his life and his daughter's dreams together. Across the scarred oak table, 12-year-old Charlotte lined up toy cars with surgical precision. Each vehicle was connected by twine and magnets, forming a delicate web of motion and mechanics. See, when you tune each car to a different rhythm, they clash, she said, her voice as bright and clear as the morning sun through cracked windows. But when they match frequencies, boom, it flows. Like music. Ethan watched in awe. That spark in her eye, it was Amelia's genius reborn. Every night, they studied together, Charlotte building ideas from scraps, and Ethan holding on to the only piece of his wife he had left. They had nothing, no money, no promises, just each other and one impossible dream. That night, as Charlotte carefully returned the toy cars to their shoebox garage, Ethan's phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. He glanced at the screen and saw a name he hadn't expected in years: Martha Quinn. Martha ran Quinn Automotive Labs, a local testing facility nestled in the snowy outskirts of town. She had once been Amelia's rival in the field of automotive innovation, brilliant, wealthy, and fiercely dismissive of anyone without an Ivy League degree, especially a self-taught man like Ethan. He answered with hesitation. "Ethan, I need you at the shop tomorrow. Early." Her voice, usually cool and composed, sounded strained. "Did something break?" "Something big. We've got a client coming in from the city, Victoria Langford. She's paying 6 figures to fix her prototype supercar." Martha paused, choosing her next words carefully. 30 engineers tried. All failed. Langford wants someone different. Ethan blinked. Different, how? She read your name in one of Amelia's old white papers. I mentioned your daughter, too. She laughed and said, "You think a mechanics kid could solve what MIT grads couldn't?" Then she said, "If you're so smart, prove it, fix my car." Ethan's stomach twisted. He knew that tone dismissive arrogance wrapped in polished confidence. He'd faced it for years before his world fell apart. But now the thought of someone mocking Charlotte, of reducing her brilliance to a punchline that struck deep. Where and when, he said, flatly. 8, Quinn Labs. And Ethan, it's a one-shot deal. You fail, and she walks. The next morning arrived wrapped in thick fog and the scent of diesel from nearby logging trucks. Charlotte, hair tied back in a messy bun, was already dressed, her battered notebook clutched tightly under her arm. "You're really letting me come?" she asked, voice trembling between hope and nerves. Ethan looked down at her, his heart clenched with pride and worry. "You're not just coming," he said. "You're leading." The moment they stepped into the sleek, sterile garage bay of Quinn Labs. The difference between their world and Victoria Langford's became painfully clear. The supercar sat like a snarling beast in the center of the room, its shell of polished obsidian black gleaming under LED lights. Around it, expensive equipment, engineers in crisp uniforms, and silent judgment filled the air. Victoria was already waiting. She stepped forward in a blazer that probably cost more than Ethan's truck, flanked by a stiff-looking assistant tapping away at a tablet. "You're Ethan McAllister," she said with a faint smile. "And this is your daughter." Her eyes scanned Charlotte like she was a stray puppy someone had let wander into a board meeting. Charlotte didn't flinch. She nodded. Victoria turned back to Ethan. "I've paid 30 specialists to fix this machine. No one can make the systems communicate. The regenerative braking interferes with the adaptive suspension. The AI overrides everything. It's chaos. I'm done with excuses." Ethan glanced at Charlotte, whose eyes were already tracing the supercar's curves, sensing its broken rhythm. "And yet you called me," he asked. Victoria smirked. "Honestly, I expected you to say no. But I'm curious, let's see if the backwoods mechanic and his brilliant daughter can do what my experts couldn't." She crossed her arms. "Impress me." Charlotte stepped forward, scribbling furiously into her notebook. Her small voice cut through the sterile quiet. "You said everything's optimized. Individually." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Yes. But did anyone think about harmony?" Charlotte looked up. "It's like putting a violinist, a drummer, and a saxophone in the same room without sheet music, each brilliant. But together, it's noise." Ethan watched Victoria's expression shift, just slightly. Charlotte continued, undeterred. "The systems aren't broken. They're just not listening to each other. You need a conductor, not better instruments." Silence hung for a moment. Then Victoria turned to her assistant. "Pull up the last diagnostics." Ethan exhaled slowly. The temperature in the room had changed. This wasn't just a test anymore. This was the moment. The one Amelia used to call the point of no return. The moment when the underdog either broke or began to rise. Ethan and Charlotte stood side by side in the lab, a father-daughter duo in hand-me-down coats and worn-out boots, surrounded by engineers in polished loafers. A giant screen blinked to life, displaying a dizzying array of graphs, codes, and diagnostic charts, all data from the supercar Victoria Langford had declared a mechanical marvel and a nightmare. Charlotte's eyes darted across the screen. "There it is again," she whispered to Ethan, pointing at a spike. "Every time the car brakes and hits a bump simultaneously, the data goes haywire. The sensors aren't sharing, they're fighting." Victoria paced behind them like a general awaiting a verdict. "Everyone sees the same thing, but no one has fixed it." "And maybe that's the problem," Ethan murmured. "They saw, but didn't listen." Charlotte tapped through layers of system data, her small fingers flying. They're all trying to be perfect, each system doing its job flawlessly, but none of them understand what the whole car needs. It's like a tug-of-war where everyone's pulling in different directions. Then, as if conjured from the fog of corporate ghosts, a chilling discovery appeared on the screen. "What is that?" Ethan asked, narrowing his eyes at a hidden process quietly running beneath the primary control software. Charlotte froze. "That code. It doesn't belong here." Victoria turned sharply. "Explain." Charlotte bit her lip. "It's watching the other systems, recording everything. And it's not even documented in your files." Ethan leaned in. His voice dropped. "You've got a ghost program riding your vehicle's brain, and judging by its transmission pattern, it's broadcasting data." "Broadcasting?" Victoria asked, ice creeping into her voice. Ethan nodded grimly. "Someone's been watching your tests. Every failure, every change, every consultant's work. They weren't just failing. They were being set up to fail." Charlotte added softly. That's why they all missed the same thing. Someone guided them to miss it. A silence fell over the lab like a falling curtain. Victoria's assistant, who had been nervously fiddling with his tablet, suddenly turned pale. His fingers hovered above the screen. Trevor, Victoria said slowly, stepping toward him. You installed this? Trevor's voice cracked. It wasn't me directly. I was told to run a diagnostics backup package from the consultants at Harmantech. I didn't know. Harmantech, Ethan muttered, jaw tightening. Run by Martin Steele. Victoria's eyes sharpened. You know him. Ethan nodded. Fists clenched. He's the one who blackballed me after Amelia and I published our theories on integrated mechanical harmony. Said it was idealistic nonsense. Cost me my job, my credibility, everything. Charlotte blinked, confused. Wait, you never told me that. Ethan exhaled. Because I didn't want you to grow up believing the world could crush ideas just because they're right. Victoria's voice dropped. If Martin planted surveillance in my car, then this isn't just corporate theft, it's sabotage. She turned to her assistant. Delete that program, now, and trace its destination. I want to know exactly who's been listening in. Trevor hesitated. Now, Trevor! She snapped! Ethan turned to Charlotte. You okay? She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. I didn't expect this. Neither did I, he admitted. But you handled it like your mother would have, calm and sharp. They turned back to the car. The sabotage explained the erratic performance, but now the stakes had doubled. This wasn't just about fixing a broken vehicle anymore. It was about proving that the very ideas Amelia had spent her life nurturing had been crushed not by accident, but by deliberate interference. And now her daughter was unraveling it all. Victoria took a long breath. Ethan, Charlotte, I want you to keep going. Forget the money. This is about more now. We're going to finish this. You two might just be the only people who can... Ethan placed a hand on Charlotte's shoulder. She looked up at him, her eyes wide but steady. I'm ready, she whispered. So they dove back in this time, not just to fix a machine, but to expose a lie, reclaim a vision, and prove that brilliance doesn't wear a lab coat or carry a business card. It builds harmony from chaos, and sometimes it comes from a child who sees what grown men refuse to. For most of her life, Victoria Langford had operated under one truth money hire's brilliance. She built her empire on credentials, PhDs, patents, Silicon Valley recruits. But that belief began to crumble the moment she saw a 12-year-old girl decode her $50 million disaster in less than an hour. As Charlotte sketched system harmonics on the whiteboard, Victoria stood off to the side, arms crossed, trying to reconcile what she saw with everything she believed. A girl with no degree, a mechanic with no company badge, yet somehow, together, they saw what 30 engineers couldn't. She caught herself staring. Why hadn't her team thought of this? Why hadn't she? Ethan, kneeling beside the open chassis, pointed toward a junction box. You see how the braking and suspension systems both route through this module. Charlotte nodded. They're treating it like a battleground, but if we rewire it as a negotiation point like a shared translator, they can compromise in real time. Victoria's assistant watched, stunned, as the two began rerouting interface protocols, making sense of a system that had baffled the best minds she could buy. Miss Langford, Trevor whispered, stepping close. We're seeing improved synchronization already. Suspension and braking just dropped conflict ratios by 36%, and that's before implementation. Victoria didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on Charlotte. Finally, she spoke. Softly, Ethan. How did she learn to think like that? Ethan wiped his hands, stood, and smiled faintly. Same way her mom did. We never taught her to memorize. We taught her to ask better questions. Amelia believed that harmony wasn't just mechanical, it was personal, emotional. You can't force systems or people to work together. You listen. You adapt. Victoria felt something shift inside her. She remembered her own childhood, gifted, pressured, trained to win. She'd been taught to compete, to dominate. But Charlotte wasn't trying to win anything. She was trying to make everything work together. And that was a different kind of brilliance. A better kind. Later that afternoon, Victoria found Charlotte sitting alone near the testing bay's glass wall, legs dangling as she watched snow fall over the pines. "Mind if I sit?" Victoria asked gently. Charlotte shrugged. "It's your lab." Victoria smiled faintly, taking the seat beside her. For a long moment, they said nothing. Just two women, one young, one powerful, both seeing the world a little differently now. "I owe you an apology," Victoria finally said. Charlotte turned. "For what?" "For laughing," Victoria said. "When I heard your dad was bringing his kid to look at my car..." I rolled my eyes, figured I was indulging a washed-up mechanic clinging to his daughter's curiosity. "But then you spoke, and I realized you saw the problem before anyone else even asked the right question." Charlotte lowered her eyes. "It's okay. Most grown-ups don't listen to me." "Well," Victoria said, "they will now." Charlotte tilted her head. "Do you think they'll be mad, the other engineers? The ones who got paid to fix it and couldn't?" Victoria exhaled slowly. "Maybe. But if they're smart, they'll learn from you." Then she paused, looked out the window. "I used to think money could buy answers," she said. "I hired the best of the best. But I never thought about hiring the right perspective. That's what you brought today." Charlotte shifted slightly. "You don't have to pay us." Victoria smiled. "Oh, I will. Not just because you deserve it, but because what you taught me today, that's worth more than fixing a car." Charlotte looked down, thoughtful. "Do you think my mom would be proud?" Victoria didn't hesitate. "I know she would." A soft silence fell again, this time filled with respect. In that moment, Victoria's entire worldview cracked open. She saw beyond degrees and titles, beyond brands and stock reports. She saw value in something rare and powerful, a mind unshackled by ego, a heart driven by purpose, and a young girl whose wisdom had brought clarity where intellect alone had failed. Something deep inside Victoria shifted, not just admiration, but alignment. She wasn't just watching Charlotte. She was learning from her, and for the first time in years, she felt hope. By morning, the snow outside Quinn Labs had turned the mountain town of Deer Hollow into a quiet painting of white and silver. But inside the lab, things were far from still. The hum of computers, the low thrum of diagnostics running, and the quiet rustle of pages flipping in Charlotte's notebook created a soft symphony of purpose. Ethan was under the hood again, now working alongside a team of stunned engineers who'd begun trailing him like curious students. Charlotte, barely reaching the top of the control console, adjusted calibration inputs with laser focus. And Victoria Langford, she was pacing, not from anxiety but from excitement. For the first time in 3 years, the car moved. Not just moved, it glided. The friction that once caused the entire system to feel like it was fighting itself was gone. Gone were the sudden jerks, the hesitation, the stuttering feedback loops. In their place, silence, balance, harmony. Trevor, no longer flustered, stood with a growing grin. Braking and suspension now operate on shared predictive data. Conflict has dropped to less than 5%. Ethan, Charlotte, this is a miracle. No, Ethan said, rising slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. This is what happens when you stop trying to make every system win and start teaching them to listen. Victoria stepped toward the two. "Before anything else," she said, voice steady, "you both deserve what I promised." She handed Ethan a check, $100,000 signed, and real. He held it but didn't look at it. "I didn't do this for money," he said. "Not really." "I know," she replied. "But I'm giving it to you because you can do more, and you should." Charlotte looked up. "What do you mean?" Victoria turned to her, kneeling so their eyes met. "I want to fund your project, a new research division built around what you discovered: cooperative system design, real-world applications, not just for cars, for cities, power grids, planes, even hospitals." Charlotte's eyes widened. "You mean, like Mom talked about?" Ethan's breath caught. "You knew?" he asked, voice low. Charlotte nodded. "She used to tell me bedtime stories about machines that helped each other instead of fighting. She said one day, we'd build them together." Victoria reached into her coat and pulled out a folded document. She placed it on the table like it was sacred. "Here's the offer. A new facility. You lead it," she said to Ethan. "And Charlotte, when you're ready, gets full access, mentorship, and support. I want to build this around you two." Ethan stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "You're serious." "As serious as a world that desperately needs better systems," she said. "And a little girl who proved it's possible." Charlotte looked down, quiet for a moment. Then she asked the one question that mattered most. "Can we call it Amelia Systems?" Victoria's throat caught. "Absolutely." Trevor turned from his screen. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this." Everyone gathered around as he pulled up a live feed, one of the surveillance backups Charlotte had exposed. It was still broadcasting, but this time, they were in control of it. The destination: Steele Automotive Group. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Martin Steele." Victoria's face turned to stone. "He tried to sabotage me. Again." But Charlotte smiled. "Let him watch." Trevor blinked. "Wait, what?" "Let him see what cooperation really looks like," she said. "Let him see what he couldn't break. Let the world see." Ethan turned to his daughter, heart swelling with something that wasn't quite pride, something deeper. Reverence. Maybe. She wasn't a child in that moment. She was a vision of everything Amelia had believed in alive. Rising. Unstoppable. Victoria grinned. "You just made yourself a target of every entrenched executive in the business world." Charlotte shrugged. "Then maybe it's time they stopped building empires on broken systems." The room fell silent. But this time, it wasn't discomfort or fear. It was awe. And under the warm lab lights, next to a machine that had once been declared impossible to fix, the future opened up, not just for a car or a company, but for everyone who ever believed that better wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. 3 weeks later, Ethan stood in the center of what used to be an abandoned logging warehouse on the edge of Deer Hollow. Dust still clung to the rafters, but the scent of fresh paint and solder smoke now filled the air. Amelia Systems had come to life faster than anyone expected. Engineers, thinkers, and dreamers from across the country arrived, some skeptical, others curious, but all drawn by the same thing, a whisper of something new, something different, a way of designing systems not to outdo one another, but to understand each other. And at the center of it all was Charlotte. She no longer sat quietly behind her dad's shoulder. She led brainstorming sessions, drew systems on whiteboards taller than she was, and asked questions so sharp they made grown men fumble their answers. The very engineers who once chuckled at the idea of a mechanic's daughter were now taking notes when she spoke. Ethan had changed too. The lines on his face remained, but they softened when he looked around the room. For years, he carried Amelia's vision like a burden. Now he carried it like a torch. And Victoria. She visited often, but never to micromanage. She sat in the back, listened, and occasionally brought coffee and donuts like a proud aunt watching a legacy unfold. One day, as the sun poured through the newly installed skylights, Charlotte stood at the center of a semicircle of engineers. "Here's what we've been missing," she said, flipping through her notebook. "When the power grid gets overloaded, systems shut down because they're protecting themselves. But what if, instead, they asked each other what they needed first?" A voice in the crowd asked. But how would they trust the answer? Charlotte smiled. That's the point. They don't need perfect answers. They need shared goals. That's how living systems survive. Trees don't grow for themselves. They feed the soil that supports the forest. Ethan, standing nearby, felt a lump rise in his throat. That was Amelia speaking through their daughter. Later that evening, after the team had dispersed and the lab had fallen quiet, Ethan and Charlotte sat on the hood of an old pickup truck behind the building. The stars stretched endlessly above them, and the hum of distant power lines whispered across the cold night. "You know," Ethan said, "your mom and I used to sit like this when we first dreamed of building something together. We thought maybe we could change the way machines worked. Never imagined this." Charlotte looked up. "She's still building it. Through us." He turned toward her. "How did you get so wise?" She shrugged. "I listen." He laughed, shaking his head. That's exactly what she used to say. They sat in silence for a while. The kind that didn't need to be filled. Finally, Charlotte asked, "Are you proud of me?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he slid his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "I'm proud with you," he said, "because you didn't just fix a car, Charlotte. You fixed people. You reminded them what we're all supposed to be building." She leaned against him. "It still hurts sometimes that she's not here." "I know," he whispered, "but every time you speak her language, every time you see what others can't, she's here." The wind rustled the trees behind them like a gentle applause. Inside the building, blueprints waited. Designs, a future built not on domination, but on cooperation. But out here under the stars, it was just a dad and his daughter, one who had carried her mother's dreams farther than anyone thought possible, and one who had finally found the strength to believe again. 6 months later, the world had started to notice. What began in a snow-covered garage with a broken car and a brave little girl had grown into something larger than anyone imagined. News outlets flooded Amelia Systems with interview requests. Headlines spoke of a father-daughter duo changing the future of engineering. But inside the walls of their research center, Ethan and Charlotte just kept working. Because this wasn't about fame. It was about truth. One morning, Victoria Langford stood at a podium in front of a crowd of engineers, CEOs, and policymakers at the International Systems Symposium in Seattle. Behind her, a massive screen displayed footage of the Harmony Integration Project, a public transportation network in Oregon powered by Charlotte's cooperative control systems. Trains that once struggled with efficiency now operated with near-perfect timing. Energy grids previously prone to blackouts had become self-balancing. Victoria's voice rang through the auditorium. "We used to build systems to dominate, to outpace, to compete. But thanks to a girl who saw what grown-ups couldn't, we're learning to build differently now." She stepped aside. The room went silent as Charlotte took the stage, wearing her favorite faded hoodie and a backpack covered in patches. She approached the mic like it was a friend, not a spotlight. She opened her notebook, glanced at it once, then closed it. "I used to think grown-ups had all the answers," she began, "that if something was too big or too broken, someone smarter would fix it. But when Mom died, I learned that sometimes. The smartest people are gone, and it's just you left with the pieces. Ethan, seated near the front, lowered his head. His hands trembled slightly. Charlotte continued, her voice clear. We tried fixing systems by making them better, stronger, faster, but they kept falling apart because they weren't working together. They were working alone. She paused. The room leaned in. My mom used to say, harmony isn't about perfection. It's about cooperation. I think that's true for machines, but also for us. A moment passed, thick with something sacred. Then she looked up and said softly, we don't need more powerful systems. We need kinder ones. Systems that ask, how can I help, instead of, how can I win? When she stepped back, the room didn't applaud right away. They stood, every single person. It was the kind of silence that came not from hesitation, but from awe. And then, thunderous applause. Later that night, Ethan found her backstage, sitting cross-legged on the floor, poking at a vending machine that refused to give her a bag of pretzels. You made the world cry today, he said, crouching beside her. She grinned. I was just telling the truth. He handed her a quarter. Try again. She slid it in. This time, the pretzels dropped. See, she said, cooperation works. They laughed. Outside, a line of journalists and industry leaders waited for their chance to talk to her. But for now, it was just father and daughter again, two people who had once shared grief by building toy cars on a kitchen table. Charlotte looked up. Dad! Yeah. What if it doesn't last? What if they forget? What if they go back to the old way? Ethan looked at her the same way he used to look at Amelia when she doubted herself. Then we remind them, he said, every day, in every system, in every voice that says, there's a better way. We keep building what matters, even if we're the only ones who believe. Charlotte nodded, quietly accepting the weight of that promise. Because the world didn't change in a day, but it did change with a daughter who believed, a father who never gave up, and a broken car that turned out to be the beginning of everything. Anyone can build something extraordinary if they're willing to listen deeply, care fiercely, and believe differently. As dusk settled over the hills of Deer Hollow, Charlotte McAllister flipped to a new page in her worn notebook, not to solve another system failure, but to begin drafting ideas for schools, cities, and homes where every piece works together. Places where cooperation replaces conflict, and brilliance isn't measured in titles but in understanding. She knew now the dream her mother once whispered wasn't just a family legacy. It belonged to every child who was told you're too young, every mechanic who was told you're not qualified, and every person who ever looked at a broken system and dared to ask, what if we fixed it together? The little girl once dismissed as a tag-along had become the mind that rewired an industry, and her father's quiet belief once mocked had changed the world. Because for Charlotte, Ethan, and those who will follow, brilliance isn't about being the smartest in the room. It's about building a room where everyone belongs. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep believing, and don't forget to subscribe if you know every voice matters.